Scott, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you?
Well, doing awesome. Just excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, the excitement is definitely all mine. So let's start with your name. So you're Scott Poteet, but I saw a kid sort of in inverted commas in the middle. So is that what you like to be called?
That is, it's the call sign from my fighter pilot days. I spent 20 years in the U.S. Air Force flying F-16s, and it's quite humorous. Most of us don't know each other by our first names. We only know each other by our call signs, and it's usually something you mess up along the way. My first real name is actually William. So short for William is Billy, Billy the Kid. I looked young back in the day, kind of stuck, and I've been affectionately known as Kid for probably 20 plus years now.
Why is it a kid with two D's? Is there any reason behind that, or was there
You
another
know,
kid?
there was there was two fighter squadrons at Aviano Air Base in Italy, and there was already a kid, KID, and so they had to differentiate me between him, and so they added a D onto mine.
That's so cool. Well, let's go straight into it. You are the new mission pilot of Polaris Dawn. Do you mind explaining to our listeners what Polaris Dawn is? And if you haven't, don't worry too much because it was only announced a few weeks ago.
Absolutely. I would love to talk about the Polaris program. So, what the Polaris program is, it consists up to three human spaceflight missions. And the overall purpose is to demonstrate new technologies and conduct extensive research. And this is going to ultimately culminate into the first flight of SpaceX's Starship with humans on board. So, similar to the Gemini program that bridged the gap between initial low Earth orbit space flight with the Mercury program, and then bridging that gap with Mercury onto the Apollo program. Obviously, what they accomplished is the reason why we're here, and we're able to even think about the objectives we've set forth with Polaris, the Polaris program, as well as Polaris Dawn, which is the first mission. So we're truly standing on the shoulders of giants as far as what NASA has been able to accomplish. But to conceptualize what that program is and means, we're trying to make that transition from, Falcon 9, Crew Dragon onto Starship, which is ultimately going to be the vehicle that gets humans back to Lunar and Mars and beyond. And the first mission that we have lined up is Polaris Dawn, in which I'm going to be the mission pilot for, and we're truly excited to partner with SpaceX on this endeavor.
That's super exciting. As far as I can see, Polaris Dawn is scheduled for a quarter 4 launch this year. This seems extremely fast, as usually space astronauts or the pilots for astronauts, have 2 years of specialist training. Is that because SpaceX is a private company and can just move quicker, or have you been kind of training quietly whilst everyone else was focusing on other things?
Would you expect anything less from SpaceX? Their ability to set forth some goals, ultimately that vision of Elon and what he's endeavored to accomplish with making this a multiplanetary species. Um, if you rewind back to prior to Inspiration 4 and what we had set forth with having the first all-civilian mission to space, those were, more or less lofty goals and how we accomplished that mission, and the success of what that's been able to bring to the table. Um, as far as the conversation with SpaceX, this is a partner with SpaceX, and these discussions began, prior to Inspiration 4 launch, but once Jared got back from that mission, the effort was focused in on building out the objectives and what needed to be accomplished to ensure the success of Starship. And so, based on conversations with Elon, a lot of these ideas, stemmed from his concepts. His focus is Starship, obviously, and getting us to Mars. And we were able to leverage those conversations and the pride and professionalism of SpaceX and what they've been able to accomplish set some lofty goals, and we're currently in the process of working through that mission design, and we'll be starting training here very shortly.
So your role as pilot, obviously, that means flying the Falcon 9. As a lot of people who are obsessed with SpaceX and space know, the Falcon 9 does fly itself from a technical standpoint. But is the idea that a mission pilot can override and take control if there's a systems failure? And is that your main role? Do you have anything else to do other than be responsible for the aircraft and back it up if there's any problems from a flight perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I am extremely blessed and fortunate to be selected as the mission pilot. With our crew of 4, with Jared, Anna, Sarah, and myself, all come with a core of experience and backgrounds that are going to help us accomplish the missions we've set forth. I couldn't ask for a better crew. You got Jared, who is one of the most experienced Crew Dragon mission commanders, and then you have Anna and Sarah, space operation engineers with extensive backgrounds building out the syllabus for all these astronauts that SpaceX are able to generate. They are responsible for developing the contingency plans and protocols necessary. And so as far as specifics, roles, and responsibilities, we all are going to have critical elements and obligations to ensure a successful mission. Based on some of the things we've set forth with science and experiments, we're all going to be directly involved in each and every one of those experiments. We're also, about to start the training that's going to make us prepared. So we think of it in more or less 3 phases. You got the first phase. We're not going to get cheated at all, based on the fact that we have 2 trainers and we have Jared, who's already been through the syllabus. I don't want to get cheated. I want every bit of experience that they went through. And it's very crucial that we do go through the basics, build out those skill sets necessary to make us competent crew members. So it's going through the systems, the general knowledge, all the basics, emergency procedures, contingency operations, so that we are familiar. But more importantly, that we're working as a team, because the element of working together, united, is going to, ultimately be the reason why we have a successful mission. Phase 2 is kind of where we get to some specialized training, and that gets to some of the objectives we've set out for this mission with the EVA, with the altitude that we're trying to achieve, with the science and research, as well as the testing of the technology with the Starlink laser communications. So we'll spend some time, months leading up to getting familiar with all of those objectives and elements. And then ultimately we're going to set some training goals out there as well, with the mountain climbing, with the fighter jet training. And again, that gets to building that cohesion, that teamwork necessary for a successful mission.
Absolutely. Well, it was great to be able to watch the documentary on Netflix about the Inspiration 4 mission, because it gave a real insight into, it gave a bit of an insight into what goes on. So you talked about the mission objectives. I mean, there's some pretty ambitious goals, and I guess as a former fighter pilot, sort of pushing the envelope comes naturally to you. But how did they come about? So, for instance, the first commercial spacewalk. I mean, did that come from Elon, or is that kind of one that is kind of an obvious step as you think about leaving the Earth's atmosphere? How did that one, for instance, come about?
To answer your question, yes and yes. It was a conversation with Elon that Jared and the team have had, and it's an inevitable objective. We are striving to build and colonize the moon, Mars, and someday in the not too near future, we will have hundreds, thousands of humans walking around in the necessary EVA suits, functioning and building out infrastructure required for us to sustain operations and habitat those environments. So it was a natural evolution of what is to come, and so we started the conversation as far as, based on the technology that we have today and the timeline associated with our mission, what technologies are necessary to colonize Mars and get us back to the moon, and B, based on the timeline that we've set forth, what can we accomplish? And so the teams are currently at work. I'm excited to say I'm heading to SpaceX this afternoon. I have my suit fitting tomorrow. So I get the 220 different measurements. How long is your pinky? Those types of measurements to be able to get fitted for my spacesuit.
That's so cool. I mean, you're casually just going to SpaceX for a suit fitting. I think I'm just going to take the dog for a walk and maybe get a coffee this afternoon. So the obvious question I should have asked is, who is doing the EVA? Would that be yourself, or is that undecided?
It's currently undecided. We're all going into training with the mindset of it could, ultimately be any of us that will step outside of the capsule. Just based on the technology, we have to bring the entire capsule down to vacuum. We're working through the protocol right now to figure out how that's going to work. But we'll ultimately all be wearing the EVA, IVA suits that will be pressurized. And we'll all be trained up, fully competent and capable to execute the necessary procedures, depending on how things play out. And safety is, the utmost concern as we go through the mission profile and figuring out exactly how this is all going to work. So at any point throughout the mission, if safety is a concern, in a fighter pilot turn, we knock it off. It's certainly not worth the risk. But as far as preparation and training is concerned, it could be any of us crew members that will execute the EVA. But we have not determined who it's going to be yet.
But obviously, you'd like it to be Kid.
Honestly, there's critical roles in everything that we're going to have to do. Those individuals that will remain in the capsule, they're still in that vacuum, and they're 2-3 feet away from space with that open hatch. But that role is just as important. The fact that if any contingency happens, you're there, you're prepared, you're fully trained to be able to get your crew members back in the capsule and deal with the situation as necessary. So,
of course,
it gets back to being selected for this role. I will remain grounded, figuratively speaking, in the fact that I know anyone could fulfill this role. We got a very, very highly qualified team on the Polaris organization that is supporting everything that we're doing. Former test pilots, former Thunderbirds. We got 4 former Thunderbirds on our team. And it's a pretty tight group. There's not that many of us. So I'm just blessed to be a part of this. I had a great experience throughout the Inspiration 4 that allowed me to experience it from afar. There weren't too many training elements and events that I missed. So I got to watch Jared go through everything that SpaceX put him through. And I'm just blessed and going to soak in every single minute. So it's going to be a fun ride for sure.
Absolutely. So you obviously met Jared. Well, I say obviously, but you were once you left the Air Force. One of your roles was VP of Strategy at Shift 4. Was that where you met him for the first time, or was it during the Thunderbirds time when you sort of met him for the first time?
Yep, it was the latter. So I had met Jared, I'm going to date myself here, about over 15 years ago when I was on the Thunderbirds. He passion for aviation. He started to acquire some fighter jets. He started to build out a civilian demonstration team. And I was on the Thunderbirds at the time. Fast forward a couple of years, he started that civilian demo team called Black Diamond Jet Team. So I'd befriended him then, and then a couple of years later, I commanded the Air Force Aggressor Squadron. And the purpose of that squadron, that unit organization, is to fly F-16s and replicate the threat and be a training aid for all U.S. Air Force assets, coalition assets to train against. And there's 2 units that do that, one in Las Vegas, in Nevada, and one up in Alaska. And then based on his evolution of aviation endeavors, he went from flying air shows to kind of building a company called Draken International, which more or less supplemented the mission of the Aggressor Squadron that is organic to the Air Force. He just made a contract service providing additional capability as well as capacity for the DoD. That has since taken off. That was back in 2015 when I was about to retire after an Afghanistan deployment. I joined him on the business development team and started working for him in 2016 with Draken International. And that company has since taken off. It went from a $6 billion contract now, or $6 million contract. Now it's like a $6 billion industry.
Wow.
Providing a very cost-effective service for the Air Force, replicating the threat and getting them trained for combat.
What is Jared like as a person? He's sort of quite well, to me anyway, he's kind of an enigma, because when you think of leaders in the space industry, you know, you think of Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, you know, because they're sort of stereotypical business leaders, although, you know, Elon would probably see himself more as an engineer than a business person. And then separate to that, you'd have people like Buzz Aldrin that are sort of significant as astronauts and test pilots, but there aren't. I can't think of anyone else who is business/pilot. I mean, I guess how much of an inspiration is he in that respect? And pun definitely intended.
Yeah, absolutely. So his inspiration is just how he functions day to day. It's his actions that inspire others, that inspire those closest to him as well as the general public. He is a very loyal individual. Honestly, at this point in my life, I couldn't imagine doing anything else other than working for him. He's a very driven individual. The dude doesn't sleep. He is very focused on the success of Shift 4, which is his primary role. But he's inhuman, you know, very similar to Elon. He's able to handle multiple things at once, whereas us normal humans can, focus on one thing and do that average at best, whereas he is highly above average in multiple spectrums of his life. He's a quiet individual. He's very competent in flying. I flew for the Air Force Thunderbirds, and that training protocol, just to put it in perspective, a typical fighter pilot's going to get anywhere from 150 to 180 hours a year flying a fighter. It's all relative, compared to a heavy, it's a lot different flying a cargo aircraft. But a fighter jet, you're flying 1 hour, a 1.5, 3-4 times a week. You're getting about 180, just under 200 hours a year. When you fly for the Thunderbirds, you fly up to 500 hours a year. So you're over 2x that, and you're flying sometimes 2-3 times a day. And you're not responsible for all the intricacies of combat operations, sanitizing your radar, working a target set within your targeting pod, this multi-dimensional assessment of the air-to-air picture. You are focused on stick and rudder flying formation. You fly low, you fly fast, and you fly close. That's why you fly so much. So it definitely takes flying for the Thunderbirds to the next level to be able to fly anywhere from 3 feet down to 18 inches when you're going 450 knots, pulling 4 to 5 Gs at 200-300 feet from the ground. Point of my story is that enormous amount of trust required to be able to fly with a team anywhere from 2 up to 6 aircraft that close, and we talk a lot about how we execute that. There's a lot of comm associated with what the boss will tell you he's doing in the lead jet, and it's always anticipated because you got to anticipate those maneuvers to be able to stay in formation without hitting another aircraft. That gets to the point of I'm not going to fly close formation with just anyone. I'm going to fly with someone that I trust and that someone is competent. Usually you only see that within the military background just because you are afforded the opportunity to fly so much.
Yeah.
If I was to fly with, a combat wingman, I'm not necessarily going to fly that close of a formation because they haven't had the training. Jared has. And the point of this long story is that the fact that he grew up in a civilian world flying, props to business jets up to fighter jets and doing air shows, I have no problem flying 18 inches away from Jared, whether he's leading or he's flying formation off me. And that's just a testament to the trust that I have, whether it's a business engagement or a career advice I'll get from him or flying fighters, trusting him with my life. There's no other better person I'd have that trust with.
Did you ever apply to be an astronaut with NASA through the traditional path? Because one imagines you had all the leadership skills, all the flying skills, which traditionally was the only route into be a NASA pilot. And when the SpaceX opportunity came about, how did it come about? Was it just a phone call out the blue, or was there a sort of secret application process?
Those are great questions. First off, I'm 48. I'll be pushing 49 at the end of this year. I grew up in the 80s, so the whole Star Wars, Top Gun came out, the right stuff. I had the two-deck VHS, played that over and over and over. So there was always aspirations, flying fighters, astronauts. It was just something I wanted to do. And I got to college. I had the opportunity to experience a piece of the Air Force by flying in the backseat of KC-135, got deathly ill, airsick, but I got to witness F-16s flying, and I was laser focused at that point. I don't care how I felt on that incentive flight. I wanted to get into that F-16 cockpit. So at all costs, I was going to commit my efforts to that endeavor. I was not a good student, and I knew, based on what I knew about NASA astronauts, and as a kid, I got to see some shuttle launches. I got to meet John Glenn, but I knew it wasn't in the cards. Academically, I wasn't motivated. In fact, my kids, we recently moved to Colorado, and going through our things, they came across one of my high school grade sheets, and there was some less than encouraging comments from the professor at the top, and there was a list of C's and D's on that report card. And so it just wasn't a motivation. It wasn't a drive of mine. But once I wanted to become a fighter pilot, that was. And when I get a hold of something, whether it's a fitness goal objective with Ironman, triathlons, running, cycling, swimming, or a professional military, want to be a fighter pilot. Once I became a fighter pilot, I wanted to go to weapons school, which is the Air Force version of Top Gun, 6-month program, kind of getting your PhD in flying tactics. Laser focus. I want to accomplish that. I was very driven. And then from there, once I accomplished my commitment for being a weapons school graduate, I wanted to be a Thunderbird. So I applied for that. And there was a progression in there just based on things I wanted to accomplish and serve within the military. If anything, the things I've been able to accomplish within the military, I attribute to this tenacity, this level of drive that I just, when I set goals out there, I won't let go. As far as space endeavors, it was something I, moved past in my childhood, going through the military. There was kind of multiple directions you can go within the military. I chose the weapons school Thunderbird direction, and one of the guys on our team is Leif Erikson. He went the test pilot route, where you more or less dedicate your career once you get through test pilot. In fact, he went to the Empire School there in the UK. That's your life.
Mm.
developmental test of airframes, new technology, new engines, upgrades to aerodynamics of platforms. That's what he chose, and that's kind of the natural progression to become what is traditionally known as a NASA astronaut. So I never thought it was going to be a possible dream of mine to accomplish. That is until you know after Inspiration 4. So working for Jared over several different career fields with Draken into Shift 4, investor relations, something nowhere, there's no connection whatsoever. Um, but as soon as I made that transition, he informed me about Inspiration 4 and the first all-civilian mission to space. So um, again, that was something that was very cool and I wanted to be a part of. So I set my goals to support his endeavors as much as possible. Um, he put me in charge on the ground as far as being a director. We call it the mission director, but there's absolutely no connection to the real mission directors of SpaceX sitting in mission control. I was responsible for a whole gamut of logistics, getting coffees, but ultimately I got to have some really cool experiences, sitting through the training, being in mission control for the launch, and being on the recovery ship for splashdown, um, which was extremely rewarding. Again, it was all back scenes, being a part of the team, but indirectly helping out the crew as necessary. And then ultimately, when these conversations started with SpaceX and the partnership and Elon, it was in standard Jared fashion, a very casual conversation. We were out on a run. Inspiration 4, we were running in Central Park. This one, we were in LA going for a run along the beach. And, we were getting close to the launch, and he starts talking about, the partnership that was evolving with SpaceX and Polaris. We hadn't named it yet, but the sequence of 3 missions leading up to Starship. And it was based on my level of commitment, my accomplishments as the director for Inspiration 4, and my background with I have a lot of experience in the military, operational test experience, which ultimately that's kind of what we set forth with the Polaris program, is to make this more of an operational flair so we can kind of move that needle, push the envelope on the performance, on some of the technology development to ensure that we can make space more accessible to humans, and B, continue to develop that technology that's going to ultimately be critical and necessary for long duration space flight. And so I got picked up to be the mission pilot, and I haven't looked back yet.
Well, congratulations. I mean, it definitely is a job of a lifetime, and thank you for Inspiration 4, raising over $240 million for St. Jude's Research Hospital in the process is more than a worthwhile endeavour. It's fantastic. I mean, you definitely inspired people like me.
Yeah.
In your opinion, did it inspire as many people around the world as you had hoped? And if not, how will Polaris do this differently? I know it's sort of a bit difficult to evaluate the levels of inspiration, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. That's a really intriguing question, because that has been one of our number one objectives from the very beginning. Obviously, we named it Inspiration 4. The idea was to inspire humanity. And we wanted to not only do things with regard to space exploration, we also want to benefit, humans back here on Earth. And that's why we partnered with St. Jude. Going into Inspiration 4, we were green and inexperienced, to say the least. But we set lofty goals. Jared's a visionary, so we wanted to make the selection process very unique. The sweepstakes, the contest, the donation of a seat to St. Jude. And we started these conversations with all these different collaborative organizations, It was like November, December of 2020. And we were going to announce Super Bowl-ish February of 21. So we were working 24/7, so many Zooms, late nights, the whole pandemic put a wrench in things, and we were working through the holidays, just trying to figure out how this was all going to play out and have the biggest bang for the buck to have an impact on, ultimately what led to our partnership with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. The first conversation we had with them, it was with their CEO and their CMO and a couple others, and they just ran with it. We pitched this idea. Most people were like, okay, you want to do what, when, where, huh? And it was a lot of spinning wheels, except for St. Jude. St. Jude immediately put together a team and dedicated all the necessary resources to get this off the ground in February, which ultimately led to us raising over $240 million. And based on the relationships we've been able to build with St. Jude and ALSAC, it was a natural progression. At the conclusion of Inspiration 4, we knew our work wasn't complete. Ultimately, we want to mitigate and prevent any child from dying from cancer at the dawn of life. So it was a natural transition to pick up where we left off, to continue to raise money for St. Jude, and ultimately capitalize and leverage what we were able to accomplish in Inspiration 4 and use it on Polaris. And so based on the space exploration objectives we've set forth, how do we leverage those to benefit those here back on Earth? The science and research. There's a huge connection there with the radiation testing and experiments we're going to perform, the Starlink laser communications, telemedicine. And, when we approached St. Jude for the second time and explained the whole Polaris program to them, they knew exactly where the connection was and how to leverage what we're trying to accomplish with some of the initiatives they're kicking off. And one of them is the St. Jude Global Initiative. And, one of the biggest concerns they have is supporting children around the world with the necessary protocol and treatments to survive cancer. If you look at some of the statistics, right now, based on the work that St. Jude's been able to accomplish, 4 out of 5 are going to survive cancer as children. It's the complete opposite globally in developing countries, where it's 1 in 5 will survive cancer. And ultimately, the number one determining factor whether a child survives from cancer is where they're born and where they live. Yeah. And so it's our initiative to be able to support their endeavors and whether that's increasing the communication via laser communication with Starlink, helping their organizations get that advanced cancer treatment and technology and protocols spread around the world, so we can increase that 1 in 5 and get it up there to 4 and 5, and ultimately 100% survival rate for all things cancer.
Amen to that. That's fantastic. Finally, before you go, because I really appreciate your time and coming on today. What did your family say when you told them you were going to space?
If you asked my wife a year ago, when I first started to explain what Inspiration 4 was and what Jared was asking of me, her first response, wide-eyed, going, "Okay, you're not going to space, correct?" And it was lack of understanding, and honestly, I really didn't know the extent of what SpaceX was up to as far as, space exploration. It wasn't until I was, partnered with them throughout the Inspiration 4 endeavors. And my wife, Kristen, she came along for a lot of the trips. She was able to meet a lot of, they're very good friends of ours now, the SpaceX team, the engineers. They are a brilliant organization, and I feel like the old dumb one walking in, because everyone's that late 20s, early 30s, and they're the smartest individuals when it comes to all things space. And so, fast forward a year, and when Jared approached me, and my first stop was, okay, Kristen, here's what I'm being offered. And honestly, I was pleased and surprised, and she was just as supportive and excited as I was. And so were the kids. They can't wait for the training to start. In fact, I'm bringing my son along on this trip so he can go along with Dad and watch him get suited up in a spacesuit. So it still gets back to our objective of inspiring. We got to inspire that next generation because, back when I was Logan, my son's age, 12. I never dreamed of flying a fighter, let alone going to space. He thinks he's going to space. It's just a matter of when. And there's millions of kids just like him that will have this opportunity. And hopefully we're just doing our little part to make that happen with with some of the objectives we've set forth with Polaris Dawn and holistically speaking, the Polaris program in order to get us to a safe execution of the first human space launch of Starship, which is ultimately going to be that 747 that's going to be taking people several times a day to Mars. So.
Exactly. Well, look, I really appreciate you coming on today. It's been amazing. Enjoy the process. Enjoy the rides. You've had an amazing career, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot more from you, and hopefully there'll be a Netflix documentary that those of us can watch afterwards as well.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks, kid.